on this computer. Good evening, ladies. I really want to, first of all, welcome you all back. It's been a little bit of time since before Pesach that we got together, and I hope that there will be even more ladies who will come on and will see the recording that we'll send out as soon as this is over. So we had a little bit of a change in the administration, not me, but in some of the staff that I was using for CyberSem. And that's why it's taken me a little bit of time to recoup and to put things and get a new group of people and put all the pieces back in place again. But I think that we're going to be in a better place, and we're upgraded as a result of doing this. And I think it'll be good in the end. It is already good. I was able to send you all out an email very quickly. One of our changes is we're now on Salesforce, and Baruch Hashem for the changes and the upgrade. And I think it'll be good for everybody. Our next Chodesh Tov will be in Av, since we're halfway through Sivan. So originally Robin was supposed to speak, I think it was even before Pesach that we started discussing this. And then it was going to be ER, and then ER didn't happen. And Sivan, we really tried for Sivan to make it in time for before Shavuos, because Robin is going to speak about Rus. But I felt, and I did this, sometimes I use a little bit of poetic license. There must be another word for license for something else. And I took the liberty to take advantage of, not in a negative sense, but in a positive sense, of the days of the Yemei Tashlumin for Shavuos, which took us till last night. So many people are busy Sunday night, so Monday night it became. And besides the concept of Rus being relevant to Shavuos, as we move on to the summer months, many of the things, the Pirkei Avos that we continue on over Kol Shabsais HaKayitz, throughout the full weeks of the summer that take us till Rosh Hashanah, we still do need the lessons, and the lessons of Rus are so very, very relevant. And so that is why I asked Robin once again to really grace us with her thoughts, and they would certainly not be lost on us as we move through the summer and need these lessons they're so valuable to us. So Robin sent me a small amount of her CV, and Robin and I actually share something very interesting in common that I only learned about when I read this. So Robin is originally from LA, and she went to Sharpman's and Stern College for her university, and then to New York University. But her original career was in health sciences, healthcare administration, public administration. And then she decided to go back to school and get her teacher's degree. And she went where I went. We both are probably the only adult women who went back to school. Robin, it's true, I think, are the only adult women who went back to school and got our degrees in teaching from Talpiot. I sat in the classroom with my children's classmates. I don't know if Robin did that, but we were certainly not coming out of high school. We were certainly not 25 when we did that. Anyway, so Robin wanted to go back to school so that she could do full-time teaching, and which she did from Talpiot. And when I was in Talpiot, I did one of my observations in Robin's classroom. So that's a little bit of our connection, but I think that it's so meaningful to share. So when I observed her classroom, she was in Eitz Chaim, and now she's Baruch Hashem in Bayslachem. Robin has been a guest speaker internationally and for many groups. And with that introduction, and really a little bit of friendship and commonalities, I welcome Robin Berglas.
Okay, thank you very much.
Robin. I'm going to make you a host.
Okay.
Robin, I'm going to make you a host, and now you're on.
Okay, thank you. Tonight, as you know, I'm going to be speaking about Megillas Rus. And when I speak about her and Boaz, I'd like to tell you, go into really what their backgrounds are. I think when you know the background of the person that you're learning about, it makes it much richer, much more interesting for you. And you're much more connected to the Megillah when you know more about the people that are involved. Now, as you know, Ruth was the queen of royalty. She was the mother of royalty because from Ruth came David HaMelech. And Boaz was also, from Boaz came David HaMelech. So I'm going to be talking about these two personalities and where they came from. And then in the end, we're going to just hash it out a little bit. Why was it that the Torah wanted, that Hashem would want them to have the backgrounds that they did in order to be the initiators of royalty? So when we have the beginning of the Megillah starts out, Vahi b'mei shvot hashoftim. It was the days in the judging of the judges. Now, one thing that you need to know is when Megillah Ruth takes place during the times of the Shoftim, it's taking place during a very precarious time in our history. During that time, there was like it was like a cycle. The Jews would do bad, they would do idol worship. Then after the idol worship, they would have a shofet come and tell them what to do. And after that, they would do teshuvah and they would be fine until the next test. And until the next time they would do idol worship again. So this was constantly happening during the times of the Shoftim. To make matters worse, we learned that the behavior during the times of the Shoftim, because it was such a precarious time, people weren't really into worrying about the next person. That's one of the reasons why Ruth, when she did chesed in such a difficult time. So when she did chesed, it was considered so great because she was coming into Klal Yisrael in the times of the Shoftim. And that's really what the beginning of Megillah is teaching us. Now, what happened during that time? There was a hunger in the land. There was a famine. Now, this person went from Bayslachem. Remember that place, Bayslachem, because it's many times it's written in the Torah. It's written when Bnei Yisrael, the sons of Yaakov, wanted to sell their brother Yosef. There was Bayslachem took place during that time. Bayslachem, it takes place because it's known as being the cradle of the birth of Mashiach. Okay, so Bayslachem has a lot of many times it's written in ways that are known. It's a kind of almost secretive, but when you unravel what's going on around it, you see that it has a lot to do with royalty, which has a lot to do with Mashiach. So there was a famine in Bayslachem, and the people that at that time were the very famous, very wealthy people at the time were Elimelech and his wife Naomi, and Machlon and Kilion, their sons. Now, Elimelech thought that he's so great that he's going to be the Melech one day. That's why his name is Elimelech. Eli Tavo Malchut. He thought the Malchut was going to come to him. And he never thought that leaving his city just because all the poor people kept banging on his door. So he just felt like, it doesn't really matter to me what I do because I'm going to be a king one day. And the truth is, maybe he would have been the king one day. He came from the right place. He had the right background. He came from Nachshon ben Aminadav. He was from Shivat Yehuda, okay, which is the Shivat where the kings are from. So it's possible, but he had this attitude about him that wasn't right. And Naomi, his wife, and then Machlon and Chilion, his two children. So we learn from here, we also learn that everything has a reason for a name, okay? When you learn Megillah, it's only like 4 parakim long. It's very short, but you learn a lot. There's a lot going on in this little tiny book because, like for instance, the idea that every name has a reason for it. The name Elimelech, Eli Tavo Malchut. The name Naomi, she has she was graceful. She was na'im. She was an imah. She was fine. She was sweet. Okay, those are the ways that you would describe Naomi. And their children, Machlon is, okay, here it says, V'shem ha'ish Elimelech, v'shem isho Naomi, v'shem shnei banav Machlon v'Chilion. Machlon comes from machala, which is a sickness, because he died young. And chilon also comes from someone who gets destroyed young. Well, they had these names. It's a question when the names were actually given to them, but they had the names by the time they died because they died young. Both of them died young. Okay, so what happens? Vayagmas Elimelech ish Naomi, Latishaer he ushnei baneha. Naomi's husband dies. She's left with her sons. What happens with them? They end up married 10 years later. They're in Moab for 10 years. Okay, so it takes place over many years of time. They end up marrying two girls, and this is where we have the beginning of our story. Machlon ends up marrying Rus, and Chilion ends up marrying Orpah. So this is really the beginning of what we see is the beginning of the background of Rus. So we see that where are they living? I don't know if I mentioned they're living in Moab. Moab is a place that we're going to learn about afterwards too. That has very, they have no midos there. There's nothing. They're cruel. People in Moab are cruel. We learned that when Bnei Yisrael went out of not Mitzrayim, when Bnei Yisrael were in the desert and they traveled to go to Eretz Yisrael, they wanted to buy. They were dying for food and water, and they wanted to even buy food and water from the Moabim, and they couldn't because the Moabim would not allow it. They were cruel. The Moabim were cruel people. And for this reason, there is a pasuk in Devarim which says, Lo yavo almani u'moavi b'kahal Hashem. Because of the way they acted to Bnei Israel, they didn't greet them with food and water. They are not allowed to come into Kahal Hashem. So that's also going to be something very significant when it comes to Naomi, because Naomi is from Moab. Naomi and her sister Orpah, the two women that married Machlon and Chilion, were children of the king, were Eglon's daughters, these two princesses. And I remember once I learned this with someone, and she was saying, isn't it amazing how you can see these two guys in a beard and payas, and who are they marrying? The princesses of Moab. I mean, it had to be Yad Hashem that he was pushing them to do these things, because otherwise, what kind of frum boy would do that? But there was no one else for them. There was no one else for them to marry during that time, and that's what they married. So, hold on. Okay, so the Orpah is married to Chilion, Rus is married to Machlon. At the end of this 10-year period, the two of them die. The two boys die. So Naomi is left on her own with her two daughters-in-law. So she tries to tell her daughters-in-law, listen, I heard that the famine in Eretz Yisrael ended. I'm ready to go back. I don't want you to go back with me. You girls stay here. You go back to your princessly, title that you had before. Your husbands are gone. There's no reason for you to come with me. So she gave this whole speech. And in the end, they said, no. And they were crying. And they said, no, we want to come with you. So they came with her for a little bit. And finally, she kept talking them out of it. And she ended up talking Orpah out of it. And Rus stayed with her. So we see, number 5, hold on. She had said, Shavna benotai lachin, ki zakanti miyos laish. Go back, my daughters. I'm too old to be married to no man. Ki amarti yeshu tikva, gam hayisi halayla laish v'gam yaladati banim. Even if I got married tonight and I had boys right away, would I have any hope that these boys would marry you? You're not going to wait around for boys like that. So that's when Orpah decided she's going to leave, but Rus is not going to leave. And when Rus said she wasn't going to leave, that's when she said she was going to stay and convert. And I'm not going to get into it now, but when she says, don't stop me from leaving, I'm going to stay. The way you rest, I will rest. The way you die, I will die, etc. That's all that has to do with halachas that she was accepting on herself now that she was converting. Now, by the way, Rus is the gematria of the word Rus. Anyone know? 606. okay? Because Ruth was already kept the 7 mitzvah Noah, and she was accepting on herself an additional 606 mitzvahs. So that's why she was called Ruth. So she decides she's staying with Naomi, she converts, and it's now, like I said, more than 10 years have passed since they left Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so they come to Bayslachem, and nobody can believe that it's Naomi. Okay. Vatomer Alehan, Chugana li Naomi, Karana li Mara. Hey Mar Shakai li Ma'od. Okay, God has been very bitter to me. Don't even call me Naomi. My life isn't nice anymore. It's not fine anymore. It's not sweet anymore. Call me Mara. So she saw people were saying, is this Naomi? Is this Naomi? They didn't even recognize her. Because when she left and she went to Moab, she was a wealthy, beautiful woman. She had a husband and she had 2 boys. Now she goes back with no husband, no children. She has Rus with her, that's it. And she's totally a broken person. So she basically says, call me broken. I don't want to call me bitter. I'm broken. There's nothing that I can do. So she comes back with Rus, and they find a place to live. And Rus decides she's going to go out and she's going to collect. So she collects in someone's field, and she collects there for a good couple months. And she's constantly going and helping her mother-in-law. And what she didn't realize was she finds out that she's collecting in a field of Boaz. So she goes and she tells her mother-in-law, you know whose field I'm collecting in? I'm collecting in Boaz's field. So her mother-in-law says to her, I can't believe it. Boaz is a relative of ours. And she brings up this other subject of Yibum. She says, when a person's husband dies childless, if a man who is related to that person, usually his brother, the closest living relative, marries the wife, the widow, then the name that's on the land will go back to the child of this widow. So the name of the land, the name of the person that died will still be on the land. This way the person will always have their name of the land of Israel, will always continue on. So Naomi was trying to find someone who would do Yibum, the miss of Yibum, with her daughter-in-law. And she said, Boaz is the perfect person to do it. He's in our family. He's also related to Nachshon ben Aminadav. Good stock, that's very good. That's a very good person to, meanwhile, don't even think about marrying him yet. Just glean in his field. So she goes and she gleans in his field. And it's so interesting. He says he greets, I want to read this too because it's so interesting. When he sees his people that work for him, so they don't just say shalom, shalom. They say shalom aleichem, and they say may God be with you, v'avrechacha Hashem. So why do they do this? So I was reading somewhere that Boaz instituted the idea that when you greet a person, you do it in Hashem's name, because in those days they were so self-centered that they didn't want to greet each other. So instead of greeting each other, they would just be quiet. So he made a law. No. You want to greet each other, say it with Hashem's name. And that way people would be more likely to do it. And that's why when he greeted his harvesters, he said, Shalom Aleichem. They said, Aleichem Shalom, Yivarechacha Hashem. So that was something that he instituted to make people nicer to each other, that they should just be nice. They should notice the next person, which is something that we should also do, that we should notice someone that's, even if it's a janitor or someone that we don't normally, hang out with. It's, someone that you want to just say hello to. There's nothing wrong with saying hello to them and greeting them, and it makes you feel like $1 million. So Boaz was that way with his workers. And there was one problem. He was already thinking of marrying her, but there was one problem. He can't marry someone from Moab, people had said. But there was this law that you can't marry a Moabite. But he figured out, and don't worry, he wasn't just, Boaz he was a judge. The other name was Ibzan, but he was also on the Sanhedrin. So not yeah, was there such? Yeah, he was on the Sanhedrin. He was a Gadol Hador. Thank you. So he had the right to make a new, to decide on what the law was. So he decided on that law that is only a Moavi, only a man from Moab cannot marry someone who is Bikal Hashem, but a woman from Moab can marry someone in Kal Hashem. He can convert and marry someone in Kal Hashem. So that was something that he was huge for, that he knew that, and he publicized that idea, because in the end he's going to end up marrying Ruth, and he's going to end up having to publicize this idea that it was okay. So Naomi finally suggested, I really think that you have to be a little more pushy. You have to go down to the granary. You have to, uncover his feet. You have to lie down next to him, and maybe he'll get the hint that you're going to want to marry him. So she does this, and Boaz tells her, oh, I hear that you were so kind. You stayed with your mother-in-law. And hold on. Let me try. Okay, Vayomer Naomi, L'kalata, Baruch Hashem Asher Lo Azav Chasto. Oh, this is Naomi is saying that Hashem didn't stop doing kindness first because he had to go into the field of Boaz. So now she's going to go down to the granary of Boaz, and she's going to go down in the middle of the night, and she's going to do this thing, and she's going to see what happens. So she goes down, and he is not at all turned off by this. This is totally fine with him. In fact, he tells her, don't leave, stay the night. Because, it's a little bit dangerous for you to go out at night. And so she doesn't leave. She stays the night, and she goes back. And when she goes back, he says, I want you to bring 6 measures of barley. Now, I don't know, the measures could have been cups of barley, bags of barley, but he wanted to give this as a gift to Naomi. But why the number 6? So the number 6 was to show that he knew that greatness was going to come from Ruth. She was going to have people that were great come with her, such as David HaMelech, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, Daniel, and of course, Mashiach. So that's a hint in the 6 sacks that he sent back with her. She returns to Naomi, and finally she ends up marrying Boaz. So this is just a basic overview of the Megillah for you, just to have an idea of what, when we talk about other things, like what's going on in the Megillah. She returns, they get married, they're given a bracha. She's given a bracha by the elders that she should be like Rachel and like Leah, that built the house of Bnei Israel, because she's going to build her own house. And the night they got married, Ruth conceived and Boaz died. So after he died, she ended up having this child that Naomi was the main one who raised the child. It says that the child's name is Oved, and the text tells us a direct lineage, and this is what I want to read to you, of Naomi and Boaz's child. So, Eila Todos Paretz. This is Paretz's children. Paretz Halid es Chetzron. Chetzron Halid es Ram. Ram Halid es Aminadav. Aminadav Halid es Nachshon. Nachshon Halid es Salma. Salma Halid es Boaz. Boaz Halid es Oved. Oved was the baby that Ruth had. The Oved Halid es Yishai. Oved had Yishai, and Yishai Halid es David, and Yishai had David. So there are those who say that the whole Megillah was written to tell us that the lineage that David HaMelech had was a pure lineage. This Moabite thing was something that had to be decided, but that it was pure, and that that Boaz was a good father, and that, I mean, he was a good father figure, he was a good person to come from, and that Ruth was a good person to come from as well. Others say that it was only to show that it was in those days when they would have a law like a Moavi, they'd write it out. So others say that the reason that Shmuel wrote this is to show that a Moabite is allowed to marry into Kahal Hashem and the Moabite is not. But that when Boaz did it, he was totally fine with doing it. Now, what I want to do is talk about where Ruth came from. If you look way back, Avraham had a brother named Haran. Haran had a son named Lot. Lot had children. One's name was Moab. So Moab came from Lot. And Ruth came from this Moab. So I want to talk about each one of them. Avraham's brother Haran. Now, Haran was a great person. We learned that a Jewish man carries the obligation of Limud Torah, and a Jewish woman takes the ideas of Limud Torah and puts the ideals into the realities of everyday life. And this is what Avraham did with Haran. Avraham was the one who brought the knowledge of Hashem to the world, and Haran is a person who taught people how to instill these ideas that they got from Avraham into the realities of everyday life. Now, Haran, what's so interesting is Haran was the father of all of our mothers. Okay, he was either the grandfather or the great-grandfather, but all of our mothers, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, all came from Haran. So that's why they have this ability, and that's why we have the ability too, is they have this ability to take the ideas that Avraham tried to teach people and invest them in everyday life. Now, after Haran had a son named Lot. Lot wasn't so great. Lot and Avraham were together, and we learned that Lot and Avraham together had a lot of cattle. 1 second. Okay. Oh, here. Okay. So Lot also had, like Avram, son and Vakar, cattle, the Ohalim, and tents. The land did not allow them to live together. They both had a lot of wealth. There wasn't enough space for them to live in the same place. So then there was a fight between the shepherds of Avraham and the shepherds of Lot. So Vayomer Avram el Lot. Avram said to Lot, don't let there be a fight between us, between our shepherds. We're like brothers. Isn't all the land before you? So Lot looked, so that's what he chose, this land. He traveled from the east, and they separated. Avraham lived in Eretz Canaan. The Lot, Yashav, Be'arei Hikar, Be'ahal Ad Sodom. Where did he choose to live? He chose to live in Sodom. So that tells us something about him. Okay, Lot chose to live in Sodom. Now, what kind of person would do that? He left Avraham. He could have lived with Avraham and learned so much from him, but he didn't. He left him, and of all places to go, he chose to live in Sodom. Usually you didn't choose to live there. You grew up there, but you didn't choose to move there. So that's what happened with Lot. So they were known for their immorality, and they were also known, by the way, very interesting. The people, when they went to Sodom, there were certain things that Lot knew from Avraham. So he knew to take in a new person. So what he would do is someone would come and he was here, come quickly into my house. And then when they would come quickly into his house, the people would want to would want to take them away and be cruel with them. So he would try and get people to go away. So we see by Yakub Basan Veirim, they hit the house, his house with like these long sticks. And so instead of you thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to tell him to go away, what does he do? He goes to the door and says, okay, listen, you cannot have my guests, but if you want, you can have my daughters. Okay, that's the kind of person that Lot was. He knew that having guests was so important. He knew that from Avraham, but he also didn't know that you don't give up your daughters. Okay, that's something that he learned from Stone. Now, what happened was after this Stone was such a bad place, that Hashem decided that he was going to destroy Stone. But before he did that, he told Lot that he could leave with his family. Oh, excuse me. So Lot left with his family, and we know what happened to his wife. She turned into a pillar of salt, but he left with his daughters, and Hashem destroyed Stone. Well, when the stone was finally totally destroyed, the daughters woke up one day and said, you know what? We're going to be the last people left to be in this world. We're going to have to somehow populate the world. 17. Okay, so what did they do? This is in Bereshis Yud Tes. So I'm in the middle of the story here, but the story here is that the older one got the father drunk. She slept with the father and she got pregnant. And then she tells the younger one, go, she said to her younger sister, go get him drunk, sleep with him tonight, and you will have children from him. But and they both became pregnant from their father. But and the Bechira, the oldest girl, had a boy. But she crushed Moab, and she called him Moab. Why? Who avi Moab? Oh no, it says Me'av, because Rashi says that Me'av. She called him. She wanted everyone to know that here it says in Lamazayin and Rashi. She wasn't sneistic. That she publicized to everybody that this child was from her father. The Tzira also had a Ben, the younger one, and she called his name Ben Ami, who Avi Bnei Ammon al Yamazeh. So these girls had Ammon and Moab, Moab and Ammon. They came from Lot. Now you know that Ruth came from Moab. So she doesn't have a very good background. Even before she started, she comes from Moab. She comes from not just non-Jews, but that's fine if she comes from non-Jews, but because someone that's so evil, that'd be the most evil of all of them. So how could it be, someone asked, how could it be that royalty comes from such a low place, from Moab? So I was reading somewhere that, I don't know who said it, it was on the internet somewhere, but it made a lot of sense, that kings need a certain amount of pride. They need a certain amount of sophistication. They need a certain amount of being able to rise above and kind of think they're above everyone else, because they are above everyone else. But this isn't a very Jewish trait, and it's not very common among Jews. So what happened? Hashem had to import this from the Moavim, because the Moavim had this tremendously. They had pride that was like their number one thing, was how proud they were. They weren't embarrassed about anything. Everything that they were made them proud. This idea had to come into the Jewish people from Moab. So there are some traits that we may not know about that come. We always wonder, like, why did that person come in, or why did this person's background? Especially we look in the Torah, like, I don't understand. How did this person become Jewish? Because there are certain traits that we don't know why, but they're not Jewish traits, but yet they have to come into our background. And that's one of the reasons why. We're going to talk about why, why they came from such a low place at another time, but we'll just say that for now. Okay. Now, this arrogance that they had is what came from Moab. Now, the Vilna Gaon says that there's something very special about Ruth and the way she wanted to be Jewish. She didn't want to just accept the 613 mitzvahs, which is okay. If you want to be Jewish because you want to accept the 613 mitzvahs and be like all the other Jews, that's okay. That's enough. But she wanted to cling to Hashem. She wanted to be above it. She wanted to be as close as she could to the source. And how did she do this? She clung to Naomi. Virus davka ba. Ruth would cling to her mother-in-law. So the Vilna Gaon says that because she yearned so much to be attached to Naomi and to Hashem, it corrected Lot's problem that he had of having the ability to be close to Avraham, who's so close to Hashem. Here, Lot had this ability and he left it. But Ruth kind of brought this idea back to us that no, we have to cling. We have to cling to people who are close to Hashem because that's a way to be close to Hashem ourselves. Now, that's basically where Ruth comes from. Where Boaz comes from, I'll just say this story quickly. I'm sure you know it. We actually taught grade 4 for many, many, many years. And we weren't allowed to teach this because there's a lot about prostitution and pregnancy and whatever. So this was something that we kind of kept away from, but it's something that we have to know. So basically we know there's a story of Yehuda and Tamar. Yehuda and Tamar's story, the story goes like this. Yehuda was in the process of helping to sell Yosef. This was going on in Yehuda's life and he left. Now he had a few children. He now was going to go have his children, okay? He goes to someone, he meets his wife, he has Shayla, he has Onan. Who's the third one? Onan, Shayla, and I'll have to see the Onan, and Shayla. Okay, so she married Er. Er was wicked and he died. Then she married Onan, thinking that she was going to do Yibum. Okay, this idea of Yibum also is very common. Okay, it's not common to us because it's something we have no idea about. Eretz Yisrael. Mashiach comes, we'll know more about it because it's how a person gets their name on the land. But at the time, Yehuda thought, oh, you know what? Tamar will marry the next boy in line, and that next boy in line will do Yibum for his brother, and everything will be fine. What happens? He was also evil and in the eyes of Hashem, and he died. So now the third one is coming up. Okay, but she says, if two of the sons this one is. She says, if two of the sons died already, I'm not going to really, what am I going to do? Like, this person is not going to wait for me. But Yehuda said, no, he'll wait for you. Meanwhile, Yehuda had no intentions at all of her marrying the third son because he figured if two of them died, then the third one's probably going to die also. No way, not getting them married off. So even though he wanted very much for someone to do Yibum for his brothers, but for his sons, the two brothers. So one day Tamar waits where the roads meet, and she decides that she's going to trick Yehuda into having a child with her because she felt it was very strong for someone to do. It was very important for someone to do Yibum with her because he had two dead children. So he goes, he has relations with her, or he's going to have relations with her. And right before he says, I'm going to send you goats. And it's interesting because the goats had to do with the goats that he was selling Yosef with, because they dipped the goat's blood. It's just so interesting how it's all related. They dipped the goat's blood in, they dipped the coat of Yosef into the blood of the goat to show Yaakov that Yosef had died, even though he hadn't died. But he says, I'm going to give you a couple of goats. So she says, well, you're not going to give me a couple of goats today. You have to give me something today as security that you're going to bring back these goats. So he decides he's going to bring her his cloak and his staff. He's going to give her these things, and then he's going to come back one day. Someone will come back and give it to him, and they have relations. Well, meanwhile, she gets pregnant. He sees one day she's wearing maternity. He sees her in maternity and says, what did you do? Not knowing that it was her, and she knew that it was him, but he didn't know that it was her. And she says, what do you mean? He says, it's adultery. You're going to have to get burnt at the stake. In those days, that's what they did. Even Jews did it. I can't believe it, but it's true. Okay. So she says to him, no. He sends someone to her who was going to actually bring the goats. And he sends someone to her first. And she says to the person, here, I'm going to give you the things that he gave me for security. And he brings it back to Yehuda. And Yehuda says, Satka mimeni, those famous words, Satka mimeni. She is right. She is more righteous than I am. He realizes that it was Tamar. He's not angry with Tamar. And we see that this is really the way of a king. A king has to admit that they've done something when they've done something. And another thing is when a person admits something, they're saying that they were missing it in the first place, which a king also has to do. A king, believe it or not, in Bnei Israel, has to have on one side, they have to be arrogant. On the other side, they have to have an amount of modesty, that they have to realize when they're wrong, they have to admit when they're wrong. They have to be modeh. That's why Yehuda's name is Yehuda, comes the word of modeh. So she has twins, and one of the twins is Peretz. And that's the Peretz who's in Megillas Rus. That's the Peretz that Boaz comes from. So we see in each of these cases, when we're talking about Rus, we're talking about Yehuda, we're talking about Peretz, we're talking about Boaz, we're talking about Lot. There are positives and negatives, and we have to, usually you figure you take the positives, but we learn the negatives. I mean, these stories are in black and white in the Chumash. Hashem didn't cover them up. So why is it that royalty comes from such murky waters? And I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on that, and then that's going to be it. So one idea that I saw was that Hashem is trying to bribe the Satan, that when the Satan sees that things are kind of his way, he leaves it alone. So if the Satan sees that, okay, the way that royalty came about wasn't so hot, look at that, it's my way. So you know what? I'm not going to do anything to the kings. So he leaves them alone. This is a case, excuse me. This is a case where this would definitely fit in about the Satan. I was also thinking about the idea that we can't always depend on the people that came before us, because everyone is only human, and the things that they did are only human. Like Rus, I look at it like the bigger they are, the harder they fall, because she was so great, she did something that was, when she went down to the granary with Boaz, even if she came from perfect stock, it wasn't really the right thing. But I think in that case, Hashem was testing the waters, and also Hashem was dealing with the Satan in that way. And the Satan was going to say, oh, look, you know what? That's kind of my way of doing things, and leaves it alone. I was watching a beautiful shir by Rabbi Silver from Baltimore. And he was saying that, in the Megillah, Megillas Rus, It talks about Rus over and over again. Rus HaMoaviyah, Musar HaMoaviyah. Even after she converted, she's still referred to as Rus HaMoaviyah. Why is that? And he said, because we have to learn that people can change. Change is something very important. Change is something that the Torah considers very important. A person is not born on this world to be perfect, and a person can definitely make big mistakes. And the bigger you are, the bigger your mistakes are. You know what they say, that the bigger a tzaddik, the larger the Yetzer Hara. But change is possible, and tshuva is very possible. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why this Megillas Rus is written about, is written during the time of the harvest, which is the time of Shavuos, because it's to show us that, you know, if you want to accept the Torah on yourself, you have to know before you go in that you're not going to be perfect. There's going to be things that you're going to do which are wrong, which is, look at this whole list of things it's in the Torah. Hashem didn't cover it up. And by the way, other religions cover things up. They don't tell us when things are not 100%. And our Torah just tells us everything. So I think that's one of the reasons why this was given, the Megillah of Rus is read when the Torah is given, to teach us that if you're going to accept the Torah on yourself, know that tshuva is such a big part of it. It's not a little thing, tshuva. It's a very, very big part of it. For this reason, the people that are greatest in the you know, when we talk about Mashiach and royalty, those people who are the greatest are people that came from not such great backgrounds and made mistakes themselves. But we see that if you're going to accept the Torah the way Rus did, that change is possible, and change and tshuva is something that's so important. And that's it.
That's okay. You deserve it. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Ladies, our next, to summarize anything or to say a comment afterwards would only be an anticlimax. This really is, you really did fulfill the goal of giving us food for thought until we meet again, but taking us throughout the summer months and putting us on our feet and really setting for us, you know what, putting ourselves on our feet is not the right thing. It's a mindset. And I think it's a mindset shift that we all need to be part of. And whenever the message is here, but I think it's so important that as we leave the days of Tashlumin from Shavuos, that this is a lesson that we're taking with us as we move along. And we see, especially during now and as we approach the 3 weeks, that that one part leads to the next. When we have a yontif, we go from one to the next. There's always a buildup of avodah and a continuing of avodah from one to the next. And so I want to thank you again, Robin, for taking us from Shavuos and putting us on our feet for the next season that we have. And that's really it's a very major mindset and a yesod, a foundation for how we're going to spend the next season till we get to the next yontif, and it'll be a foundation for the rest. Thank you. Ladies, thank you very much for coming. Emir Hashem, our emails will become more regular again as we get ourselves on our feet. And you'll look for the save the date. I'll put it out when this recording is done. When we're finished with this, I'm going to stop